Hello, everyone. Welcome to Athletically Speaking, episode 2. This week, we're covering college football blue bloods, and I have my guest with me today, Austin Stokes. He is a dear friend and one of the Wagon Wheel Sports poll voters. How are you?
Thanks for having me, man. I'm doing pretty good. Glad to be here. I love any chance I get to talk about sport. It's always pretty good.
That's right. And then we're talking about the best sport, college football.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Sweet. So let's start this thing off. To you, what makes a blue blood?
You know, a blue blood to me in college football is somebody that when I think about, old school retro college football, those are the teams that come to mind as being those kind of the dynasties. We can go back and we can say, Ohio State, Notre Dame, we can name all those big schools, but they're teams that year in, year out, the expectation is a national championship, and they've got a history of performing to that level and a history of being able to compete every single year and just getting the best recruits in the nation, getting the best coaches, best facilities, and putting up spectacular numbers every single year.
Right. It's like a handful of teams. Not every
Yeah.
college is a blue blood.
Hmm.
You have to earn that through years of success, and you're winning championships, and if you're not winning them, you're right there on the edge of being able to win it at any point in time. So on to the next question. Who are they? Which
You
schools
know,
to you
we
are blue
can we can
bloods?
go back and we can say, the first school that comes to my mind is Notre Dame. We can go back and look at, you know, the 80s Notre Dame, Catholics versus cons. Even in that discussion, Miami in and of itself is a blue blood.
Mhm.
And we can look at, Barry Switzer era of Oklahoma football. As after the year 2000, I'd say Alabama is definitely in the running for that. Ohio State every year is a contender and have been for 2 decades now. As definitely one of the bigger programs, and those are all schools that there's 30 for 30 documentaries made about them, and there's these eras of defining football that really changed the landscape of whether it's how college football is coached or how college football players are recruited. These are the programs that are kind of leading that charge and really taking a hold of the reins as far as what you need to have in a winning legacy and a winning program, being able to establish that you know every year for 30 to 40 years.
Mhm. It's interesting, that you talk about the recruiting aspect of it. Even today's age now, you have NIL, and look who's taking the reins on that. You got the
Yeah.
Alabamas of the world, Ohio State, Georgia's now up there. Like they evolve, and that's what keeps them long lasting throughout this stuff, right? So my teams that I have selected, I've seen many people go different ways on, and we'll talk about and debate some of these other teams right here. But from what I can tell and from what I've looked at, I have 6 teams that I would consider a blue blood of college football: Alabama, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Ohio State, Michigan, and USC. I believe that those are the 6, like the most well-defined blue blood programs in all of college football.
Yeah, and USC is a team that not a lot of people are going to take into contention with this, and that's something that I think it's in the minority, I'd say, for the blue blood discussion. I definitely think there was something special in the 90s and the early 2000s of it with USC football, and those were programs that when I think of well ran, well oiled machines in college football, I'm thinking 2006, 2005, 6, 7, USC.
Mhm.
Great program through and through. Um, aside from the scandals and whatever your opinions are on that, it was still a great program. And Michigan's another one that a lot of people not overlook, but definitely I wouldn't say hold to the same caliber that you're going to hold Alabama. Michigan every year, that's a tough team to beat. You can't go to Michigan and beat Michigan. That's the one team I'm not going to bet against at home. Michigan is propelled by fan base. Michigan fans are some of the most diehard fans on earth. Um, I You don't see that a lot outside of the SEC. And for Michigan to come in and have, in a lot of ways, a stronger fan base than a lot of SEC teams establishes that blue blood record because they've proved themselves to their fans. And every year their fans are going to expect, in today's era, a playoff appearance or, a top 5 bowl appearance. So I agree with that. And of course, Alabama is probably going to go down this era of Alabama. And we're coming out of that now. But I would say this past 2 decades of Alabama football is the best college football program ever. And I don't think that's going to get a lot of contention when I say that. That this 2000, generalizing 2000 to about these past 3 years, that's been the most dominant program ever. And that comes from Nick Saban. That comes from the fact that it's Alabama football. And a lot of that is conference. And I try not to die on the hill of conferences make teams, but the SEC made Alabama. Were Alabama to be in the ACC, there would be no need to recruit and have Nick Saban the way that they do. But because it is the level of contention that they're seeing, I feel like that brings a certain element to the table. And it's, when you're talking about who are the blue bloods right now, it's tough to say that the SEC doesn't have them, especially with the merges that we're going to see in the next couple of years. But I'll agree with all those. I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. I think that those are all programs that in the next 10 to 20 years we'll see more documentaries about, and especially, and we're obviously a little biased on this, but I think Oklahoma has definitely solidified itself as a blue blood, especially after Barry Switzer and after Big Game Bob and after the Stoops era. It's tough to say right now with Venables, kind of a lackluster first season, but I definitely think that they have solidified themselves as a blue blood college, and I definitely agree with all that.
And you go back even further with Oklahoma, you got the 47-game win streak with Wilkinson. I mean, Benny Owen, the history's there for them.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting you bring up the fan bases, because I think like a part of being a blue blood is your fan base is there, which when I get to some of these other teams that I have listed, you can talk about, like, say, Nebraska, their fan base is there, but are they really a blue blood? They had the 90s there. It was really good, and a little bit here and there in the 2000s, but throughout history, have they been there?
I think there's a case to be made there. I think that you could convince me that Nebraska is a blue blood. They're a team. It's just tough to beat Nebraska in Lincoln. It's tough to go in there, and these past couple of years it's a different story. But there for 10 to 15 years, you didn't want to play Nebraska at home. That was a tough place to be. The Nebraska football, or Cornhusker football, is the identity of Nebraska. I think you could really make a case for it. Maybe had that success continued more into the 2000s and more into the recruiting era, I think there could be a case to be made there. But with just the past 5, 6, 7, maybe up to the past 10 to 12 years, there's just not really much to say. And, coaching turnover and whatnot. And it's tough to get guys that want to live in Lincoln, Nebraska. But you could probably make that case. I could definitely see both sides of that argument.
I think the downfall of Nebraska football happened when they got rid of the walk-on program. That helped their team
Absolutely.
tremendously, and you see where it left them now after the fact of getting rid of that.
That created a lot of identity for Nebraska football. These are guys that weren't getting recruited anywhere else, and now that they realize that this is their shot, this is their walk-on opportunity, that it created a lot of reason and a lot of drive, which is, that's my favorite aspect about college football, is that, and now with NIL, this might change in the next couple of years, but they're not playing for money. They're playing for their team, and they're playing for their state, and they're playing for their pride. And Nebraska, to me, is one of the epitomes of that as far as legacy goes. Record doesn't really reflect that. I do think that's one of the downfalls of that, that walk-on program, is that these aren't guys that were 3, 4, 5 stars in high school. they probably played with teammates who went to the bigger schools and the bigger programs, but these are guys that understand that they need to make a mark if they want to have a future in the game. And so, as far as record goes, I don't think it's there, but as far as identity as the team, I definitely think it's there.
Nebraska's got 5 national championships, an all-time win percentage of 680. Like, they've been pretty good throughout. It's just a matter of when you piece it, is like, did this all happen within the 90s, or was it everywhere else?
It's easy for teams to get hot and stay hot for a couple years. You build momentum. Clemson was the team to beat for the 2015 to 2020 era. Everybody wanted to go play at Clemson. That was the school. And now we're kind of seeing that die out. And, Florida State for a couple years. And every year in the college football playoffs, you have your one kind of, random team that gets in there. And it's tough. It's easy to catch those hot streaks. It's tough to maintain it. And I think that's where Nebraska kind of lacks. And that's personally why I wouldn't put them in that discussion for a blue blood, because I think, I'm not going to say they got lucky, but I am going to say that they found the recipe for success in that era and just had a really tough time translating that over into they didn't progress with the game is what I'm trying to say, I guess.
Tom Osborne made it work and made Nebraska really good. He found that rhythm and stuck with it. And then after him has just been nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Next team. What about Texas? Texas has 4 national championships, an overall winning percentage of 702. How are you feeling about them as a blue blood?
I think and that's another team that I can see the case. We can look way back for Texas. We can go back into the 70s, the 80s, hell, we can go back to the 60s and say that that's a blue blood program. I think probably not too long after the Vince Young era, it just got a little tough for Texas. As far as, Big 12, everybody was coming to Oklahoma. Everybody wanted to go play at these other schools. And I think they caught a couple years of bad coaching and bad recruiting that it's just been tough for them to come back from. And moving into the SEC is not going to help. I definitely think that they're going to really have to step up the kind of player they're bringing in. And Arch Manning could change the game completely. It really does just take one player to revitalize a program that has such a storied legacy. I would include them in the discussion. I wouldn't put them anywhere above your Alabama, your Michigan, and Oklahoma, Ohio State, Notre Dame. I wouldn't put them anywhere up near that. But I definitely think that that they have a blue blood legacy. Whether or not you want to include them in your top 5 of all time, that's a personal preference, and that's something that I personally would, and I know a lot of other people would agree with me on that. But a 780 winning percentage, that's tough to hate on. Pretty much, you know what I mean?
When I think of Texas, I think of the Mac Brown era and then Darrell Royal. Those are 2 big times in Texas football that they were really good. They were at the top of the game.
Yeah. And anytime you have that caliber of player, you're doing something right. You're doing something right with recruiting and coaching, and then you're doing something right with player development. Which is another thing that I think maintains legacies throughout decades, is player development and what can you do with them when they get to campus. It's easy to bring in great players. Everybody wants to play Division I football. That's not the issue. The issue is, can I take these guys and can I form them into the next greatest college football player ever? Can I make them the next Barry Sanders? Can I make this quarterback, the next, whoever you say, can I make him the next Peyton Manning? Can I make him the next whoever? That's where a lot of programs are going to fall through. Texas has shown both sides. They've shown taking guys who are just incredible and continuing to nurture that and continuing to sow. But, there's a lot of other guys that came in pretty hyped up and came in with a lot surrounding them and then just didn't do a lot. And, I talked about him earlier. Vince Young's one of those guys. A lot of personal factors there, but he's a guy that was the greatest college football quarterback in the early 2000s, if not one of the greatest, if not the greatest. That just didn't really do a lot after, and you can point a lot of fingers there, but the player development is what that comes down to. And I think that's kind of, for me, what holds Texas back.
And it's interesting because, like, here just of recently, Texas usually will out recruit most people.
Yeah.
Like they're finishing first in the Big 12 in recruiting rankings almost a year in, a year out. But other schools, Oklahoma's, whoever is out developing these players that they're getting and just running right past them.
Yeah. And I mean, a couple tough years of coaching. The Charlie Strong year was just bad for player development and for recruiting. And it's, 2 bad years will hurt your recruiting for the next 5 years. Nobody, if I'm a 4-star wide receiver and I'm getting offers from, Clemson or Bama or Georgia or, even Arkansas, I'm not going to want to go play in Texas. I'm not going to want to go play for a team that is struggling to get their feet back from under them. I want to go play somewhere that has had a solid foundation. And in a lot of ways, you got to follow that trend. If your goal is to win games in college football, you have to follow trends. Tough to predict, but that's kind of what you got to do. Coaching matters, and they just haven't really had a strong caliber of coach in a while. I can't name you a Texas coach in the past 5 to 10 years that has really just stuck out. We can go back to when the Red River rivalry was at its peak, and not say that it isn't anymore, but when that was the most storied rivalry in college football, and we can say that those were two of the best programs ever. That era of Texas and that era of Oklahoma, but since then I just haven't really been too impressed with the product that Oklahoma or that Texas is putting out. And like you said, they're pulling in the best recruits in the country, but they cannot maintain their success. They can't. It's overplaying them. It's not developing them right. It's trying to fit them into a system that they don't need to be in. And I think now with the transfer portal getting bigger and with NIL getting bigger, it's just going to be tough to keep those guys around if they're not developing like they want to and like they should. So
you got to get teams, you got to get players to the NFL. That's like the ultimate goal. Is if you can't get them to the NFL, then you're not getting them.
Winning games is important, and that's the coach's focus. But these guys aren't playing. They don't want their playing career to end at Texas, and they don't want their playing career to end at somewhere, in like LSU. They're wanting to get to the next level. If they're good enough to get there, their sights are set much higher. And that's just the culture that's been cultivated over the past couple of years, is that, well, if I'm good enough to play here, well, then I better get drafted. And guys want to go where they're pumping out recruits in the NFL. Oklahoma, Alabama. Those are the two programs that when I think of putting stars in the NFL, it's those two programs. And I was never much of a football player myself, but if I was, I probably wouldn't have wanted to go to Texas just because of the quality of player that they're putting into that next level is just not up to par with some of these other programs.
All right, next team up, Penn State.
Nittany Lions, they were a tough team. They were just a hard-working group of guys. Even back in the Paterno era, that was a tough team. You do not want to play at Penn State. I remember even, and this doesn't hold much weight, but even on the old NCAA games, you just didn't want to play Penn State. They ran their offense well. They were a tough team. They weren't flashy. They were going to outwork you on all fronts, and you weren't going to catch them lacking ever. You weren't going to catch them on a bad week. You had to just be better than Penn State. You couldn't count on their mistakes. That's a storied legacy. That's absolutely a storied team. And that's a team that, to be honest with you, when I first found out we were talking about Blue Bloods, I didn't think Penn State. And then looking back over it, I mean, it's tough to say that they're not. That's just had been a great team. We can talk about identity. People love Penn State. And that's an identity that goes a little past football, in my personal opinion, even into basketball. That's a great school. Player development, I don't really know. I can't really attest. I couldn't name you many NFL players from Penn State off the top of my head right now, ever, to be quite honest with you. But when you had a coach, I would say Paterno is kind of the Bear Bryant of our lifetime. A guy that found the recipe for success at Penn State and continued it. And that, we talked about player development earlier. That's the player development school. They're going to make you into a tough, hardworking guy, no matter who you were, no matter if you came in a little lackluster, you're going to compete every single week. And they, I think a lot of these schools now, your Alabamas, your Georgias, Clemson, even Texas on a lot of fronts, um, there's going to be some identity to these guys. There's going to be some individuality. There's not that at Penn State. Nobody's coming out to be a superstar. They're coming to win games, and they're coming to play for Penn State. And I love that. I respect that totally. And that shines out to me a lot as, a guy who respects that Monday through Friday work as opposed to just that Saturday work. I think that's a team that is absolutely a blue blood. It goes without saying that Penn State, I don't know their winning percentage off the top of my head, but I can guarantee you it's up there with the likes of some of these teams that we're talking about.
Their winning percentage is 688.
Yeah, see, exactly. So they're up there with the big dogs. They're one of the better storied legacies in football. And they're another team that, when I think about like old school smash mouth college football, I'm thinking Penn State.
Joe Pa was there for 60 plus years. Like this man made Penn State what it is today.
Yeah. And I mean, that success is still carrying over. Joe Pa is still a name that is reveled and worshiped in Penn State. Despite everything that might have gone down with outside stuff and with, the Sandusky era, it's tough. You can't discredit their football program. I keep saying it, and this means a lot to me when we're discussing this. You don't want to play Penn State at Penn State. I think a lot of teams nowadays are capitalizing on other teams' mistakes, and a lot of the game comes down to hoping that they're going to screw up on some aspect. Penn State's not a team that's going to screw up. A very well-oiled machine. Now, how's their offense? Has that style of offense and has that style of defense held up into this decade? No. But every single year they're going to compete, and they're going to be a team that it's not going to be an easy game. It's not going to be a cakewalk. So I would absolutely say that they're a blue blood team for sure.
Last on the list here, Miami, Florida.
I love Miami. I love Miami football, especially in the Catholics versus Cons era. I could see the argument that says that they are not a storied legacy, that they got hot for a while. I mean, you could say what I said about Nebraska, about Miami, but when you've got a coach like they had during that era, who went on to have a lot of success in the NFL, it's tough to discredit that. That's a team that was going to show up and they were going to beat you down, and they were going to let you know that they were beating you down, and there was going to be no question that it was just going to be tough to beat them. And that's a team with my personal favorite fan base during that time. Miami fans were crazy. Miami in the 80s was just an unruly city and an unruly culture. And to see that even go onto the football field says a lot about them. And that's a town that really cared about their football teams. They loved the Hurricanes. Mm-hmm. And that's still a team that even in this decade has that same identity. If a guy goes to the U for college and they go play in the NFL, they're always I can pick them out of a lineup. You can just tell when a guy played for Miami, because there's a stigma that comes with that. There's an attitude that Miami brings, and I think that's great for football. I love that. When a school, the Ohio State, the U, it's tough to say that they're not. And I like Penn State. They're absolutely up there for me. I don't know their exact winning percentage, but they're up there absolutely.
The bad boys in Miami throughout the 80s, early 2000s, like that was a great era of Miami football, of college football in general. Like they set the tone.
It was fun to watch. You can go now and those games are still fun to watch. I think that 30 for 30 on the Notre Dame Miami rivalry is my favorite of all time. I could read about that and watch stuff on that forever. You don't see that anywhere else. There is no other organization, in my opinion, in college football in the past 30 years that has had that impact. It's Miami football is unlike any other program in the United States. It's the closest to an NFL atmosphere that you're going to get. These guys are superstars. These are celebrities. These are big shots. And you only get that at Miami, in my personal opinion.
Mm-hmm. All right, next question up. Can you gain or lose blue blood status?
I think you can. We're in an era right now where I think we're seeing the emergence of Georgia as a blue blood. And I think we're in an era where we're going to see a lot of these teams that we're talking about now lose that. I think, we just talked about Miami. That's a great example. What has Miami done in the past couple of years? Where have they gone? Who have they put out? Or they just really haven't contended well. Um, I mean, if we're going straight off historical legacy, then technically we've got to include Harvard, Yale, Princeton. These are teams that don't even compete Division One. But if we're going off historical legacy, and if we're going to say we can't lose blue blood status, technically they're blue bloods. I absolutely think you can lose it, and I 100% think you can gain it. I think gaining it takes decades and decades and decades to build. You year in, year out for 30 years, you're going to have to compete. It's tough to predict, but I think you absolutely can lose and gain it. And I've seen teams lose and gain it. I mean, we've seen teams on the brink of blue blood status. A&M for a couple years there had some real promise. They had guys, freshmen up to seniors, that could have competed for the next 5 years and just didn't. In the Johnny football era, in the the mid 2000s, the 2010s, that's a team that it was tough to compete with. That wasn't an easy game. But I absolutely think you can lose and gain it. I think it takes just as long to lose it, though. I mean, we're still talking about Notre Dame in that era. Notre Dame's a great team. Notre Dame's going to compete every year, but I don't remember the last Notre Dame national championship. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. So I absolutely think you can lose and gain that. 100%.
People bring up Michigan. Michigan hasn't won an outright title, I think, since the 40s. And then their last one was in like the 90s when they shared with like
Yeah.
Nebraska, I think.
Yeah.
But they have the most wins ever in college football.
I think if you're going to say that, man, and that's tough. And I'll eat my own words on this 100% at some point in the future. If national championships are the only thing that defines blue bloods, and there's a lot of other teams we have to take into account. I don't think it is. I don't think national championships are the only defining factor. I think it is important, if we're going to talk about blue bloods, to say that these are teams that can clinch that and can clutch that title. But I mean, how are you going to say Michigan's not a great football team, not a great football program because they hadn't won a national championship? I mean, come on, watch them. You don't want to play the big blue. You absolutely do not want to go to Michigan and play Michigan. It's old school football. It's, I've always said that before I die, I want to see them play Ohio State at Michigan. Because that's not a rivalry. That's not an atmosphere you're going to see anywhere else. So, I mean, I don't think national championships define that necessarily. But it plays an important factor, yes. But I mean, you're nuts to say that Michigan's not a blue blood football team.
So I put maybe with both of these, because to me, if you can lose a blue blood status, then were you really ever a blue blood in the first place?
That's a good point. That's tough, and that's there's so many arguments for both sides on that, and I'm sure there's a lot of arguments to say no, you can't lose it, and yes, you can lose it, but I think that it just takes time. It takes establishing a foundation of success every year. We might not see any more blue bloods become established for the next 20 years, but I still think that we are in a really defining era for college football. So I'm going to say yes, that you can lose and gain it.
All right. So this will bring me to my thing of UConn basketball, because everybody's talking about they've won 5 titles in 24 years. Are they a blue blood? And I said no, because they began playing basketball in 1901. So for me, you have 1901 to 1999 where they didn't do anything. But then from 99 to now, they've won 5 titles. New money? Maybe. Blue blood? No.
I will agree. If you ask me about this in 5 years, my answer will change. But right now, no, because of exactly what you said. They've been playing basketball for over 120 years, and they're just now catching wind. We can go into what that entails. I am not the basketball expert, so I'm not gonna try and justify that, but I'm gonna agree with you, and I'm gonna say no. Give it 5 years, give it 10 years, give it 15 years. Ask me again, my answer will 100% change. Right now, no. I mean, if we're gonna say that, we have to include schools like Butler. What has Butler done since they had that big, what was it, like a 3-year stretch of showing up? Duke, absolutely. Duke is 100% a college basketball blue blood. North Carolina, UConn. I'm not going to say no. I'm going to say not yet.
When they go another 25 years and have 10 titles in 50 years, then you're
I'll be more
talking.
susceptible. Yeah,
Yeah.
then I'll say yes. But right now, no. In 2023, no.
All right. So I'm going to group these next questions together. We got 8 minutes on our timer. So if you can gain blue blood status, who do you think in a 25 to 50 year span would you be talking about? Okay, this team is now a blue blood or is now in
Georgia,
consideration for a blue blood.
Georgia, 100% Georgia. To dominate the SEC like they are, that's nuts. You don't see that outside of Alabama. And for Georgia to come in and just shut it down like they are, Georgia. That's my answer is wholeheartedly. You started asking that, and that was the first team that came to mind is Georgia. That's the best dynasty in college football right now. That's the best well-ran programs top to bottom. Had Clemson carried their success, I might say Clemson, but after last year, I'm not. Dabo's a great coach. Trevor Lawrence was a great quarterback. You can go as far back as 2010 and say that Clemson could have been a blue blood program. Georgia right now will 100% be a blue blood program. I can guarantee you of that. They are setting themselves up for the next 30 to 40 years. And it's tough to predict that. And that's something that a lot of people are going to debate for a long time. Georgia is going to be a blue blood program. They are not right now because we're still early into that legacy. But when you can knock off Alabama like they are, and when you can take the reins of the SEC like that, it's tough for me to say that you're not going to be a blue blood one day. And that might just be Kirby Smart, might be a great coach. Stetson Bennett and the guys that came before him might have just been great quarterbacks. But, you'd be hard pressed to tell me that Georgia's not going to be one of the best programs in college football in the history of college football within the next 25 years.
Yeah, the next decade of Georgia football is really going to make or break that argument there, because can Kirby do what Nick Saban did and be able to sustain this success that they're having for a couple decades, or is it just going to fall back into what Georgia has been in some recent years?
I don't remember a year where Georgia was outright bad. That might just be because they're an SEC team, and SEC teams outside of a select few aren't bad. But that's just tough to predict. I mean, you can say that it's all Kirby Smart. You can say that it's all, the dog pound. You can say this and that. But I think come back in 10 years and come back in 15, 20, 25, 30, Georgia's a program that they're going to write stories about. They're going to make documentaries and books about. You don't come out of nowhere like that and not continue that success. This has been a gradual build, and that to me is an indicator of a blue blood program. It wasn't just, we're hot for the next 5 years and we're going to show up in the college football playoffs every year for the next 4 years. It's been gradual and it's been steady, and that's a great indicator for me.
Someone outside of Georgia and the SEC who we haven't talked about, who would be someone that you could see upcoming now into that status?
Outside of Georgia and outside of the SEC, I mean, man, I don't know. Like I said, had Clemson kept their success and had Florida State kept their success, Oregon maybe. I'd be interested to see how that develops. They've been back into the top seeds in the past couple of years, and I like Oregon football. I think it's a different atmosphere up there. I'll say Oregon, maybe. Oregon's a tough maybe, though. I mean, it's just tough to predict that. Look, 25 years in the future of college football. I mean, might not even have college football in 25 years. It's just one of those things that I'm really interested to see what's going to happen with that program. They were up at the top for a couple of years. I distinctively remember watching Mariota and Winston battle it out in the national championship. And I'm really interested to see that they continue their success in the next 5-10 years, and just to see what Oregon football is going to look like.
My answer to that question, I had thought, would be Florida State. Florida State is like right there. I feel like on the brink. Like Bobby Bowden brought them up in the 90s, early 2000s. Jimbo had them winning a national championship in 2013. They were in the playoff a couple times. Like Florida State is right there.
Yeah, they absolutely are. And I think give me 1 to 2 more national championships and I'll make that argument a little sooner. Um, right now it's just tough to compete with anybody that's not the Big 12 and the SEC. Or well, it's tough to not be in the Big 12 or the SEC and compete with the Big 12 and the SEC, which I think kind of hurts them. But Ohio State's doing it. Uh, Oregon's doing it. Notre Dame is definitely doing it. So I'll agree with that. I'll back you up on that.
And right now, I mean, who even knows? Florida State
Yeah,
and Clemson could be playing in the SEC and, you know,
exactly.
15 years from now, like
Yeah,
realignment, everything, the way it's shaking out right now, who knows where teams will be landing. And really, that may be beneficial to both Clemson and Florida State be out of
I
there.
agree. I agree. I think that you know you wouldn't have been able to convince had you told me 3 years ago that Oklahoma would be in the SEC. I wouldn't believe you. Um, had you told me 3 years ago that Alabama wouldn't be the next college football championship winner for the next 10 years, I wouldn't believe you. So it's one of those things that sports are hard to predict. It's just tough to say who's going to be successful in 2 years, and it's even harder to say who's going to be successful next year, really. But I think give them some time, give them a couple more national championships, and then I'll be a little bit more willing to talk about Florida State in that conversation.
All right, that's all the notes I have taken down. Anything you'd like to pop in with? We got 2 minutes.
No, man, we just about covered everything that I had prepared. I appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to coming back.
Yes, sir. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, like and subscribe to the YouTube, like the video, share it, everything you got to do. Thank you,
Absolutely.
sir.
No problem, Blade. I'll see you around, buddy.
See ya.